The mountain fortress of Kraventhar had stood for 3,000 years, carved into black stone that seemed to drink the sunlight. Within its halls, dragon cubs learned the ancient ways of their kind. They practiced fire breathing until their throats burned raw. They memorized the names of every dragon elder who had ever lived. They fought each other with tooth and claw until blood stained the training grounds. This was the way it had always been. This was the way it would always be. Elder Vormash stood at the edge of the training circle, his scales gleaming like polished obsidian in the torchlight. He watched the cubs with eyes that had seen centuries pass. 12 young dragons, none older than 50 years, circled each other in the ancient combat ritual. Their wings were still soft, their horns still growing, but already they carried themselves with the pride of their species. Again! Vormash's voice echoed off the stone walls. You fight like hatchlings. Show me the fury of dragonkind. A red-scaled cub named Thresh lunged at his training partner, jaws snapping. The other cub, silver-scaled Kyrie, dodged and raked his claws across Thresh's flank. Both creatures were the size of large horses, though they would grow much larger with age. Their movements were clumsy compared to adult dragons, but fierce nonetheless. Vormash nodded in approval. The old ways were harsh, but they produced warriors. Dragons did not coddle their young. Dragons did not show weakness. Dragons conquered, dominated, and ruled from the sky. It was their birthright, written in fire and blood. The training session continued for hours. By the time Vormash dismissed the cubs, they were exhausted and bleeding from dozens of minor wounds. They limped to their sleeping chambers, where they would rest before the evening meal. Tomorrow would bring more training, and the day after that, until they were ready to join the ranks of adult dragons and claim their own territories. Everything changed 3 days later when the human arrived. She came as tribute from one of the villages in the valley below. The humans there had learned long ago that dragons could not be fought. They could only be appeased. So twice a year they sent gifts to Kraventhar, usually gold or livestock, sometimes weapons forged by their best smiths. This time they sent a person. Her name was Elena, though no one asked her that at first. She was simply called the human, or the tribute. She stood in the great hall before Elder Vormash and the other adults, her head held high despite her obvious fear. She wore simple clothes, a brown dress, and worn boots. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face. She looked small and fragile, surrounded by creatures that could swallow her whole. Another mouth to feed, Vormash grumbled. What use is a human to us? She is skilled in healing arts, said one of the village representatives, a trembling man who would not meet the dragon's eyes. She can tend wounds and illnesses. We thought she might be of service. Vormash snorted, smoke curling from his nostrils. Dragons rarely needed healing. Their bodies mended quickly from most injuries, but he supposed there might be some use for her. The cubs were always hurting themselves during training. Perhaps she could keep them from being completely useless while their wounds healed. She may stay, Vormash declared. Put her in the lower chambers. She will tend to the cubs when they injure themselves. If she proves worthless, we will eat her. Elena's face went pale, but she nodded. The village representative fled gratefully, and so the human became part of Kraventhar, though no one expected her to matter much. The cubs met her the next day. They had been fighting again, practicing the aerial combat techniques that would serve them when their wings grew stronger. 2 of them had collided mid-flight and crashed to the ground. Nothing was broken, but both were bruised and bleeding. Vormash brought them to the lower chambers where Elena had been given a small room and basic supplies. She looked up as the huge creatures entered, her eyes widening. The cubs, Thresh, and a green-scaled female named Lissa, stared back at her with equal curiosity. They had seen humans before, of course, tiny figures in the valleys below, running in terror when dragons passed overhead. But they had never been this close to one. Fix them, Vormash ordered Elena. They must be ready for training tomorrow. Elena stood slowly. The cubs towered over her, each one 3 times her height. Lissa's tail alone was longer than Elena's entire body, but the human did not run or scream. Instead, she approached carefully, her hands open and empty. "May I touch you?" she asked Thresh, her voice soft. "I need to examine your wounds." The question surprised everyone. Dragons did not ask permission. Dragons took what they wanted. But something about the gentle inquiry made Thresh hesitate. He lowered his head slightly, a gesture that might have been a nod. Elena's hands were warm against his scales. She worked carefully, cleaning the wounds with water and herbs that stung but also soothed. She moved around his body, checking each injury, her touch gentle but confident. When she found a scale that had been cracked, she applied a paste that eased the pain immediately. "There," she said when she finished. "Rest today if you can. The wounds will heal faster." Then she turned to Lissa and repeated the process. The green dragon had been watching intently, and she submitted to the examination without protest. Elena worked in silence for a while, then began to hum softly as she cleaned a particularly deep scrape along Lissa's foreleg. "What is that sound?" Lissa asked suddenly. Elena paused. "A song. My mother taught it to me. I always hum it when I work. Does it bother you?" "No," Lissa said slowly. "It is strange, but not unpleasant." Vormash watched all of this with narrowed eyes. He did not like the way the cubs were looking at the human. There was too much interest there, too much curiosity. But the injuries were tended, and that was what mattered. He herded the cubs back to the training grounds, leaving Elena alone in her chamber. That night, Thresh and Lisa told the other cubs about the human, about her gentle hands and strange songs, about the way she had asked permission before touching them, as if they were equals rather than superior beings. The other cubs listened with fascination. "I want to see her," said Kyrie, the silver-scaled cub. "Me too," added a small blue dragon named Pip. "We have training," Thresh reminded them, but even as he said it, he remembered the warmth of Elena's hands and the way the pain had faded under her care. The next day, during a break in training, 3 cubs managed to sneak away to the lower chambers. They found Elena grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. She looked up in surprise as they crowded into her small room. "Are you injured?" she asked immediately, setting down her work. "No," Kyrie admitted. "We wanted to see you. Thresh and Lisa said you were different from what we expected." Elena smiled and the expression transformed her face. "Different how?" "Kind," Pip said simply. The little blue dragon shuffled closer. "Elders are not kind. They say kindness is weakness." Something sad flickered across Elena's face. She set down the pestle and folded her hands in her lap. "Kindness isn't weakness. It takes more strength to be gentle than to be cruel. Anyone can hurt others. Not everyone can heal them." The cubs absorbed this in silence. It contradicted everything they had been taught, but somehow hearing it from this small human, it felt true. Over the following weeks, more cubs found reasons to visit Elena. At first, they claimed injuries, small scratches that barely needed attention. Then they stopped pretending and simply came to talk. Elena never turned them away. She would continue her work while they sprawled in her chamber, telling her about their training or asking questions about the human world. She told them about villages where humans lived together, helping each other through harsh winters and poor harvests. She described music and festivals, art and storytelling. She explained about families, about mothers and fathers who raised their children with love rather than harsh discipline. "Don't your parents train you to fight?" Thresh asked one day. Elena shook her head. "Humans protect their children. We keep them safe while they learn and grow. Fighting comes later, if it comes at all. Many humans never fight anyone in their whole lives." This concept was almost impossible for the cubs to grasp. Dragons were warriors from birth. Combat was their purpose, their identity. But Elena spoke of a different way of living, one built on cooperation rather than domination. Elder Vormash noticed the cubs were distracted. Their performance and training suffered. They were slower to respond to commands, less aggressive in combat practice. He increased the intensity of their sessions, thinking they had grown lazy. But it did not help. One evening, he followed several cubs as they left the training grounds. He watched from the shadows as they entered Elena's chamber. He listened as the human told them a story about a brave knight who saved a kingdom not through violence, but by uniting people who had been enemies. Vormash felt something cold settle in his chest. This human was poisoning the cubs' minds with her weak human ideas. She was undoing centuries of dragon tradition with her soft words and gentle hands. He burst into the chamber, his massive form filling the doorway. The cubs scrambled to their feet, eyes wide with fear. Elena stood more slowly, positioning herself between the angry elder and the young dragons. "What treachery is this?" Vormash roared. "You fill their heads with lies and weakness." "I tell them the truth," Elena said quietly. Her voice did not shake, though she must have known how easily he could kill her. "I tell them there are other ways to live besides constant fighting. There is only the dragon way." Vormash's tail lashed, smashing into the stone wall and sending chips of rock flying. "We are the dominant species. We rule through strength." "You rule through fear," Elena corrected him, "and fear only lasts until something stronger comes along." The blasphemy of those words hung in the air. Vormash could not remember the last time anyone had dared contradict him. His jaws opened, fire building in his throat. He would end this now. He would burn the human to ash and reassert the old ways. "No!" The shout came from multiple throats. The cubs surged forward, placing themselves between Vormash and Elena. 12 young dragons, their wings spread in defiance, their eyes blazing. "Stand aside," Vormash commanded. "This does not concern you." "Yes, it does," Lisa said. Her voice shook, but she did not move. "Elena has shown us kindness. She has helped us. We will not let you hurt her." "She has corrupted you." Vormash took a step forward. The cubs held their ground. "She has made you weak." "She has made us think," Thresh said, "about what we want our lives to be, about whether the old ways are the only ways." Vormash stared at them in disbelief. In all his long life, he had never seen cubs openly defy an elder. It was unthinkable. It violated every law and tradition of dragon society. He should burn them all where they stood for this insolence. But something stayed his fire. Perhaps it was the unity he saw in them, the way they stood together, protecting someone weaker than themselves. Perhaps it was the memory of his own youth, centuries ago, when he too had questioned the harshness of dragon life. Or perhaps it was simply that he could not bring himself to kill 12 cubs, no matter how defiant they were. "This is not over," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. Then he turned and left the chamber, his heavy footsteps echoing through the halls. The cubs sagged with relief. Elena's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Pip curled up next to Elena, resting his head carefully on her lap. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her hand coming up to stroke the blue dragon's scales. "You were very brave." "We meant what we said," Kyr told her. "We won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he said it, all of them knew that Vormash would not give up so easily. The confrontation had merely been delayed, not avoided. The old dragon would find a way to remove Elena's influence from Kraventhar, and when he did, the cubs would have to choose between the human who had shown them kindness and the traditions that had shaped their entire species. The next morning, Vormash called a council of the elder dragons. 6 ancient beings gathered in the highest chamber of Kraventhar, their combined age spanning millennia. Vormash told them about Elena and the cubs, about the defiance he had witnessed, about the dangerous ideas spreading through the young dragons. "The human must go," declared Gormoth, a scarred bronze dragon who had fought in the last great war. She undermines everything we have built. The cubs are young, said Silvara, the only female elder. Perhaps they are simply curious about something new. This will pass. It will not pass, Vormash insisted. I have seen the way they look at her, the way they speak of her teachings. She has captured their hearts, and through their hearts, she is changing their nature. The elders debated for hours. Some wanted to kill Elena immediately. Others suggested simply sending her back to the village, though none believed the cubs would accept that quietly. A few argued that perhaps some change was not entirely unwelcome, that dragon society had remained unchanged for too long. Finally, they reached a decision. Elena would be given a choice. She could leave Kraventhar voluntarily, returning to the human lands and never speaking of what she had seen. Or she could stay, but only if she agreed to stop teaching the cubs her human ways, and instead reinforce traditional dragon values. Vormash did not like the compromise, but he accepted it. He went to Elena's chamber that evening to deliver the ultimatum. He found her surrounded by all 12 cubs, as he had expected. They were listening to her describe human art, the way painters captured light and shadow on canvas. Human, Vormash said coldly. We must speak. Elena stood, and the cubs immediately tensed, but she gestured for them to remain calm. What do the elders want? Vormash explained the choice she had been given. As he spoke, he watched her face carefully. He expected to see relief at the offer of freedom. Instead, he saw only sadness. I cannot do either of those things, Elena said quietly. Then you choose death, Vormash stated. No, Elena shook her head. I choose to stay and continue being myself. I will not lie to the cubs about who I am or what I believe, and I will not abandon them when they have shown me such loyalty. The cubs made sounds of approval and gratitude. Vormash felt his anger rising again. This human was impossibly stubborn. You understand what you are refusing? He asked. The elders will not tolerate your continued presence if you defy their decree. I understand, Elena's voice was steady, but I also understand that these young dragons deserve to know there are different ways to live. They deserve to choose their own paths, not just follow the one laid out for them by tradition. That is not how dragon society works, Vormash said through clenched teeth. Perhaps it should be. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Vormash realized in that moment that there would be no compromise. Elena would not back down. The cubs would not abandon her, and the elders would not accept this threat to their authority. So be it, Vormash said. The council will convene again tomorrow. They will decide your fate. He looked at the cubs, at their young faces filled with determination, and perhaps the fate of these cubs as well, if they continued to defy the old ways. After he left, the chamber fell into heavy silence. The cubs pressed closer to Elena, seeking and offering comfort. What will happen? Pip asked in a small voice. I don't know, Elena admitted. But whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you all has been a gift. You have shown me that even creatures raised to be fearsome can choose gentleness, that even the mightiest beings can choose love. What is love? Thresh asked. Dragons did not use that word. They spoke of loyalty to the clan, of pride in their strength. But love was a foreign concept. Elena smiled. Love is what you showed when you stood between me and Elder Vormash. Love is caring about someone else's well-being as much as your own. Love is choosing to protect someone weaker than yourself, even when it puts you in danger. Then we love you, Lisa said simply, and the other cubs rumbled their agreement. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and touched each of them, her small hands gentle on their scales. And I love all of you. No matter what tomorrow brings, that will not change. They stayed together through the night, the human and the dragons, knowing that dawn might bring separation, or worse. Elena told them more stories, sang them soft songs, and answered their endless questions about the world beyond Kraventhar. The cubs, in turn, told her dragon legends, described the sensation of flight, and shared their dreams of the future. As the first light of dawn crept through the high windows, they heard the sound of many wings. The elder dragons were gathering. The council was about to begin. "Stay here," Elena told the cubs. "Whatever the elders decide, do not put yourselves in danger for me." But even as she said it, she knew they would not listen. These young dragons had learned something that their elders had forgotten or never known. They had learned that some things were worth fighting for, not because of pride or dominance, but because of love. The cubs followed Elena as she walked through the halls toward the great chamber. Their footsteps echoed in the stone corridors, a strange procession of one small human and 12 young dragons who had chosen to stand with her. Elder Vormash waited in the great chamber along with the other elders. Their massive forms cast long shadows in the morning light. Behind them stood dozens of adult dragons, summoned to witness this unprecedented event. "You were told to remain in your quarters," Vormash said to the cubs, his voice like grinding stone. "We go where Elena goes," Thresh said firmly. "Then you will share her punishment," Gormoth growled. Silvara, the female elder, shifted uncomfortably. "They are young. They do not understand the gravity of what they do." "We understand perfectly," Kyrie said. "We understand that Elena has shown us kindness and taught us to think for ourselves. We understand that you want to punish her for that because it threatens your control over us." Angry roars erupted from the adult dragons. How dare these cubs speak so disrespectfully to their elders? Vormash raised a claw for silence. "The human has been given a choice," he announced. "She has refused both options. Therefore, the council has decided she must be executed." Elena closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. She stood straighter, facing her death with courage. "However," Vormash continued, "the cubs present a problem. If we execute the human, they will rebel. They may even attack us to protect her. We cannot allow this division in our ranks." "So what do you propose?" Silvara asked. "A trial by combat," Gormoth said, his voice eager. "Let one of the cubs fight for the human's life. If the cub wins, she may stay. If the cub loses, they all accept her execution." The cubs bristled at this suggestion. None of them were skilled enough to defeat an adult dragon in combat. It was a trap, a way to show their powerlessness while maintaining the illusion of fairness. "No," Elena said loudly. "I will not allow any of them to be harmed for my sake." "It is not your choice," Vormash told her. Then he turned to the cubs. "Who among you will fight for your human?" The cubs looked at each other, uncertain. They all wanted to volunteer, but they all knew they would lose. It would be suicide. "I have a better proposal," Elena said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "Let me fight for my own life." Laughter erupted from the adult dragons. A human challenging a dragon? It was absurd. "You would be killed instantly," Silvara said, though her tone was not mocking. "Perhaps," Elena agreed, "but it would be my choice. The cubs would not be harmed, and I would die doing what humans do best, fighting for what they believe in despite impossible odds." Vormash studied her carefully. There was something in her eyes, a determination that reminded him of the greatest dragon warriors he had known. This human was not weak, despite her small size and soft flesh. She had a different kind of strength, one that had already proven dangerous to the old ways. "Very well," he said slowly, "you will face me in combat. If by some miracle you survive for the duration of 1 hour, you may remain in Kraventhar and continue your corrupting influence. If you fall before that time, the cubs will accept your death and return to their proper training." "Agreed," Elena said immediately. The cubs erupted in protest, but Elena silenced them with a gesture. "This is my choice. Honor it." The combat would take place in the Great Training Circle, the same place where the cubs practiced their fighting. The entire population of Kraventhar gathered to witness this strange spectacle. A human challenging an elder dragon. It would be a story told for generations. though everyone expected it to be very short. Elena was given no weapons and no armor. Vormash insisted that if she was to fight as a human, she should fight with human capabilities alone. She stood in the center of the circle, looking impossibly small. Vormash took his position opposite her, his massive form radiating menace. "You understand you cannot win," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "I understand that winning isn't always about who survives," Elena replied. "Sometimes it is about what you prove through the attempt." Vormash felt a flicker of respect for the human. Then he reminded himself that respect did not matter. Only tradition mattered. Only the strength of dragons mattered. The signal was given. The combat began. Vormash moved slowly at first, giving Elena a chance to flee or dodge. But she did neither. Instead, she stood her ground and waited. When his massive claw swept toward her, she dove forward, rolling under it and coming up closer to his body. The watching dragons murmured in surprise. She had moved toward him instead of away. It was a bold strategy, staying close where his size would be a disadvantage, rather than fleeing where his speed would catch her easily. Vormash adjusted his tactics. He tried to crush her with his weight, to pin her with his claws, to catch her with his tail. But Elena was quick and unpredictable. She seemed to anticipate his movements, rolling and dodging with desperate grace. When she could not avoid an attack, she used her small size to slip through gaps that no dragon could fit through. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. The watching dragons grew quieter. This should have been over in seconds, yet the human still lived, still moved, still fought. She was bleeding from a dozen scrapes where scales and claws had grazed her, but she had not fallen. Vormash felt his frustration growing. He was barely trying, holding back his true strength to avoid killing her instantly. But even restrained, he should have been able to end this. The human was making him look weak in front of the entire clan. He unleashed his fire, a great gout of flame that filled half the circle. Elena barely escaped, her clothes singed, her hair smoking, but she was still alive. The cubs watched in terrified awe. Their Elena, their gentle healer, was fighting an elder dragon and surviving. It should have been impossible, but humans, they were learning, specialized in impossible things. 30 minutes had passed. Vormash's patience was exhausted. He would end this now, hour be damned. He lunged forward with all his speed, jaws open wide enough to swallow the human whole. And 12 young dragons leaped into the circle. They swarmed around Elena, wings spread, forming a living shield between her and Vormash. The elder dragon skidded to a stop, his momentum carrying him into the wall of cubs. They held firm, pushing back, their combined weight just barely enough to slow him. "No!" Elena shouted. "Get back! You will ruin everything!" "We will not watch you die," Thresh said. The other cubs roared their agreement. Vormash backed away, his chest heaving. He looked around the circle at the shocked faces of adult dragons. The cubs had violated every rule of combat by interfering, but they had also done something unprecedented. They had acted as one to protect something they cared about. "This is not your fight," Vormash said to them. "Yes, it is," Lissa replied. "Elena fights for the right to teach us her ways, but we fight for something bigger. We fight for the right to choose how we live our lives." "You are cubs," Gormoth interjected. "You do not have the wisdom to make such choices." "Then when?" Pip demanded. "When do we get to choose? After decades of training? After centuries of following the old ways? What if we disagree with those ways? What if we want something different?" The questions hung in the air. The adult dragons shifted uncomfortably. No one had ever asked these things before. Young dragons simply accepted what they were taught. That was the foundation of dragon society. Silvara stepped forward. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we have been so focused on preserving our traditions that we forgot traditions must serve the living. They should not be cages that prevent growth." "Traitor," Gormoth hissed. "You speak like the human." I speak as one who remembers being young, Sovara countered. I remember questioning the harshness of our ways and being told that questions were not allowed. Perhaps if I had been allowed to question, I might have found better answers than simple obedience. Other adult dragons began to murmur. Not all agreed with Sovara, but her words had struck a chord with some. Formash could feel the unity of the clan fracturing. This was even worse than he had feared. Enough! His roar silenced everyone. The combat is over. The hour has not yet passed, but I concede. The human may stay. The cubs cheered, but Vormash silenced them with a glare. However, he continued, things cannot continue as they were. The clan is divided. Those who wish to follow the old ways cannot coexist with those who embrace this new path. There must be a separation. What do you propose? Silvara asked carefully. Formash looked at Elena, then at the cubs clustered around her, then at the adult dragons watching with varying expressions of confusion, anger, and uncertainty. Those who wish to follow the humans' teachings may leave Kraventhar, he said. We will not stop you, but you may not return. You will forge your own path, create your own traditions, and we will see which way proves superior. The old ways that have sustained dragonkind for millennia, or these new ideas born from human weakness. It was a test, a challenge, and an exile all at once. Vormash expected the cubs to hesitate. They were young. Leaving the only home they had ever known would be terrifying. Without the protection and guidance of the clan, they would be vulnerable. But he had underestimated them again. We will go, Thresh said immediately. The other cubs nodded. You will die out there, Gormoth warned. Cubs alone cannot survive. We will not be alone, Kyrie said, moving closer to Elena. We will have each other, and we will have Elena to teach us a different way. Vormash looked to the adult dragons, expecting none of them to follow, but Sovara stepped forward. I will go with them, she announced. I am old, and I have seen enough of the old ways. I wish to see what these new ways might bring. Two other adult dragons joined her, younger ones who had been listening to the cubs' questions with growing interest. It was a small group, but it was enough. The cubs would have some adult guidance at least. So be it, Vormash said heavily. He felt as though he was watching the end of an era. Leave before sunset, and know that if you choose to return, you must renounce all of the humans' teachings. The exodus happened quickly. The defecting dragons gathered what few possessions they wanted to take. Elena packed her herbs and medicines. The cubs said goodbye to those remaining behind, though the farewells were awkward and strained. As the sun began to set, the group stood at the entrance to Kraventhar. 13 dragons, 1 human, and an uncertain future. Behind them, Vormash and the remaining clan watched from the heights. Where will we go? Pip asked, a hint of fear in his voice now that the reality of their choice was settling in. Away from the mountains, Silvara said, to the forests and valleys where hunting is easier. We will find a new place to call home. And we will build something new, Elena added, a community where strength and gentleness coexist, where questions are welcomed and different ideas can flourish. The dragons spread their wings. Elena climbed onto Thresh's back, holding tight to his neck. Then, as one, they leaped from the cliff and soared into the dimming sky. Behind them, Kraventhar slowly disappeared from view. Vormash watched until they were specks on the horizon. Part of him felt relief that the troublesome human and her corrupted cubs were gone. But another part, a part he tried to ignore, wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. The defecting dragons flew through the night, putting distance between themselves and the mountains. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had given up and what they might gain. When dawn came, they found a valley with a river running through it and forests thick with game. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way, nothing like the stark majesty of Kraventhar, but welcoming nonetheless. They landed in a clearing beside the river. The cubs immediately began exploring, while Silvara and the other adults surveyed the area for dangers. Elena slid off Thresh's back and stood on ground that felt both foreign and full of possibility. "What do we do now?" Lissa asked, returning from her exploration of the nearby woods. Elena smiled. "Now we begin. We build shelter. We establish hunting grounds. We create rules that serve all of us, not just tradition. And we see what happens when dragons are raised with love instead of fear." "Will it work?" Pip asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "No one has tried this before, but that is what makes it exciting. We get to discover the answer together." The cubs gathered around her, and even the adult dragons drew closer. In that moment, standing in an unknown valley with an uncertain future, they felt something they had never felt in Kraventhar. They felt hope. The first weeks were challenging. The cubs were not skilled hunters yet, and they struggled to catch enough food without adult dragons doing most of the work. Elena helped where she could, using her knowledge of plants to supplement their diet with edible roots and herbs. She taught them about cooperation, having them work together to drive prey toward ambush points rather than hunting individually. Silvara watched these lessons with fascination. The humans' methods were strange, but they worked. The cubs caught more game working as a team than they ever had competing against each other. "In Dragon Society, we train cubs to be independent," Silvara said to Elena one evening. "Each dragon claims their own territory and defends it alone. But your way requires them to rely on each other." "Humans are social creatures," Elena explained. "We survive through cooperation. I think dragons could benefit from the same approach, at least while they are young and learning." "And when they are adults," Silvara asked, "will they still remain together?" "That will be their choice," Elena said. "Some may want their own territories. Others may choose to stay with the group. The point is that they get to decide." As the weeks turned into months, the small community began to thrive. The cubs grew stronger and more skilled. They practiced combat still, but they also practiced other things. Thresh showed an unexpected talent for strategy, planning complex hunts that maximized their efficiency. Kyra became fascinated with the stars and began learning navigation. Pip, smallest of the group, discovered he had a gift for diplomacy and could mediate disputes between the others. Elena taught them about human history, art, and philosophy, but she also learned from them. The dragons taught her about flight, about seeing the world from above. They taught her dragon legends and songs, ancient stories of heroes and adventures. The exchange went both ways, creating something new from the blend of two cultures. Other dragons occasionally passed overhead, traveling between territories. Word spread of the strange community in the valley, dragons who chose to live together rather than apart, cubs who questioned everything, a human who taught dragons about gentleness. Some laughed at the stories, others were intrigued, and a very few, came to see for themselves. The first visitor was a young adult dragon named Corin. He had heard the tales and did not believe them. Dragons living peacefully with a human? Impossible. But curiosity brought him to the valley. He found the cubs practicing flight maneuvers, working in formation like a flock of birds. Below, Elena watched and called out corrections, helping them refine their technique. Silvara supervised, offering guidance when needed. Corin landed nearby, announcing his presence with a roar. The cubs immediately formed a protective circle around Elena, a reaction that had become instinctive. But when they saw the visitor meant no immediate threat, they relaxed. "You are the ones they speak of," Corin said, his tone uncertain. "The dragons who left Kraventhar." "We are," Thresh confirmed. "Have you come to mock us or to learn?" The direct question surprised Corin. Cubs did not usually speak so boldly to adult dragons. "I came to see if the stories were true. They say you follow human teachings." "We follow Elena's teachings," Lissa corrected. "She happens to be human, but the wisdom she shares is universal." Corin's gaze shifted to Elena. She looked back at him calmly, neither afraid nor aggressive. You are the one causing so much trouble among dragonkind? I am the one offering an alternative to the old ways, Elena said. Whether that is trouble depends on your perspective. Corin spent 3 days in the valley, observing the community. He saw cubs who laughed and played, but also trained and learned. He saw dragons of different ages working together rather than competing. He saw a human treated with respect and affection by creatures who could destroy her with a thought. On the third day, he approached Sovara. I wish to understand more, he said. May I stay and learn? Sovara looked to the cubs, and they looked to Elena. It was Elena who answered. You may stay if you come with an open mind and a willing heart. We do not force anyone to accept our ways, but we ask that you respect them while you are here. Corin stayed, and when he eventually left, he did not return to his old territory. Instead, he claimed land adjacent to the valley and visited frequently, slowly adopting some of the community's practices. Word of this spread further. More dragons came to investigate. Most left unconvinced, clinging to traditional ways. But some stayed or settled nearby, forming a loose network of dragons who were willing to question and experiment. Back in Kraventhar, Vormash heard these reports with growing unease. The humans' influence was spreading beyond the small group that had left. Dragons across the region were discussing new ideas, questioning old assumptions. The very foundation of dragon society was being challenged. We must act, Gormoth insisted during a council meeting. If we allow this to continue, the old ways will be forgotten entirely. What would you have us do? Vormash asked tiredly. We gave them the choice to leave. We cannot punish them for taking it. We can make an example of them, Gormoth said. Destroy their valley and scatter the survivors. Show all dragons what happens to those who abandon tradition. No. The word came from Vormash himself, surprising everyone, including him. We made an agreement. They left peacefully. We will honor that. Then you are as corrupted as they are, Gormoth snarled. Perhaps I am simply old enough to recognize that change is inevitable, Vormash replied. We can resist it and be swept away, or we can observe it and learn from it. The council dissolved in argument. The clan was divided now, split between those who wanted to preserve the old ways at any cost, and those who thought perhaps some adaptation might be necessary. Meanwhile, in the valley, Elena celebrated her first year with the dragons. The cubs were nearly adult-sized now, though they still had years of growth ahead of them. They organized a celebration, a tradition borrowed from human festivals. They hunted together and shared the meat in a communal feast. They told stories, mixing dragon legends with human tales. They sang songs, an eerie harmony of dragon voices and Elena's clear human tones. And they spoke about what they had learned and accomplished. A year ago, we chose an uncertain path, Thresh said, standing before the gathered group. We did not know if we would survive. We did not know if Elena's teachings would work for dragons, but we chose to try because we believed there had to be more to life than endless training for battles we might never fight. And we were right, Lisa added. We have grown stronger, yes, but we have also grown wiser. We have learned to work together, to value each other beyond our combat skills, to question rather than blindly accept. Pip, still small but confident now, spoke next. We have learned that different is not wrong, that tradition should guide us, not imprison us, that we can honor where we came from while still choosing where we go. The adult dragons listened with pride. Even Sovara, who had spent centuries following the old ways, felt something shift in her understanding. These cubs were becoming something new, not weaker than traditional dragons, but different, perhaps even stronger in ways that previous generations had never considered. Elena stood last. Tears shone in her eyes as she looked around at the dragons she had come to love. When I came to Kraventhar, I was terrified. I thought I would be killed or enslaved. Instead, I found something I never expected. I found students who became friends. creatures of legend who became family. You have given me a home and a purpose. You have given us more, Kyra said. You have given us a future where we choose who we become. As the celebration continued into the night, no one noticed the lone figure watching from the distant mountains. Vormash had flown to a peak overlooking the valley, drawn by reports of the gathering. He watched the dragons below, their shapes illuminated by firelight as they celebrated together. He saw the cubs, nearly adult now, displaying both the strength of dragonkind and something else, something harder to define. Joy, perhaps, or purpose beyond simple survival and dominance. He saw Silvara, older than him by decades, laughing at a story one of the cubs told. He saw the human, tiny and fragile, surrounded by creatures that loved her enough to defy millennia of tradition. And Vormash wondered, not for the first time, whether he had been right to let them go, or whether he had made the greatest mistake of his long life. He returned to Kraventhar with no answers, only questions. Questions that grew louder with each passing day as more dragons left to join or visit the valley community. Questions that challenged everything he had ever believed about strength and tradition and the nature of dragonkind. 2 years passed. The valley community grew to 30 dragons of various ages, plus Elena. They had established clear territories but shared resources and knowledge. The cubs from Kraventhar were fully adult now, each having found their own path while maintaining bonds with the others. Thresh became a leader, his strategic mind helping to organize hunts and resolve disputes. Lissa explored far and wide, mapping new territories and establishing friendly relations with distant dragon clans. Pip, despite his small size, became the community's diplomat, negotiating with other dragons and even with human villages that had heard of the strange valley where dragons did not raid or terrorize. And Elena, now 30 years old, had become something unprecedented in dragon history. She was what they called a dragon friend, a human who lived among dragons not as prey or servant, but as an equal. She continued to teach new arrivals, sharing her philosophy of cooperation and questioning. But she also learned, absorbing dragon wisdom and lore, becoming a bridge between two species that had never truly communicated before. It was in the 3rd year that the crisis came. A great sickness swept through the region, affecting dragons and humans alike. It started with fever and weakness, then progressed to seizures and death. Traditional dragon remedies proved ineffective. The illness spread rapidly, and panic began to grip even the most stoic dragons. The valley community was not spared. Several dragons fell ill, including Pip and Silvara. Elena worked tirelessly, trying every remedy she knew, but nothing helped. The sick dragons grew weaker each day. In desperation, Thresh flew to Kraventhar. He landed in the great courtyard, ignoring the hostile stares of the dragons there. He approached Vormash directly. "We need help," Thresh said without preamble. "The sickness has reached our valley. Our people are dying." "Your people," Vormash said coldly, "chose to abandon the clan. You face the consequences of that choice." "Even if it means death?" Thresh demanded. "Even for cubs and elders who have done nothing wrong except believe there might be a better way to live?" Vormash looked away. In truth, the sickness had reached Kraventhar as well. Several elder dragons were ill. The traditional healers were having no success. They were all facing the same threat. "We are all dying," Vormash admitted. "Your sickness and ours are the same. We have no cure to offer you." Thresh felt hope dying in his chest. He had expected anger or rejection, but not this helplessness. If even Kraventhar, with all its ancient knowledge and resources, could not stop the sickness, what chance did the valley community have? He returned with the grim news. Elena received it in silence, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. She had not slept in 3 days, sitting vigil with the sick dragons, trying treatment after treatment. "There must be something," she said, more to herself than anyone else. some cure we have not considered. Elena, Kyre said gently, you have done everything possible. Perhaps some things cannot be fixed. I refuse to accept that. Elena stood abruptly. Human healers faced plagues before. They found solutions by sharing knowledge, by combining remedies from different cultures. We need to do the same. How? Lissa asked. The clans do not speak to each other. Each guards its secrets jealously. Then we change that, Elena said firmly. We gather healers from every clan, human and dragon. We share what we know. We work together to find a cure. It was an ambitious plan, perhaps impossible, but they had achieved impossible things before. The healthy dragons spread out across the region, carrying Elena's message. They invited healers from dragon clans and human villages to gather in neutral territory. Many refused, suspicious of the strange request. But some came, driven by desperation as the sickness claimed more victims. They met in a canyon halfway between Kraventhar and the valley. 30 healers, human and dragon, gathered in an unprecedented assembly. They eyed each other warily. Centuries of fear and hostility could not be easily overcome. Elena stood before them, small and exhausted, but determined. The sickness kills us all, she said, dragon and human alike. We can face it separately and fail, or we can face it together and perhaps find an answer. Dragons do not need human help, one of the dragon healers said dismissively. And humans have learned to fear dragons, a village healer countered. Why should we help those who have terrorized us for generations? Because we are all dying, Elena said simply, and because this might be our chance to end the cycle of fear and violence. If we can save each other, perhaps we can learn to live with each other. It was not a rousing speech. Elena was too tired for eloquence, but the plain truth of her words struck home. The healers looked at each other, at the sick and desperate in their own communities, and slowly began to share what they knew. The human healers described symptoms and treatments they had tried. The dragon healers contributed their knowledge of rare mountain herbs and ancient remedies. They compared notes, finding patterns and connections. It was a human healer named Old Thomas who made the breakthrough. The fever pattern, he said, studying notes from multiple sources. It mirrors a livestock disease we saw 20 years ago. We treated it with a combination of moonflower and dragon's breath fungus. Dragon's breath fungus? A dragon healer repeated. That is toxic to most creatures. In large amounts, yes, Thomas agreed, but in small, controlled doses, combined with moonflower to counter the toxicity, it kills the infection faster than it can spread. They worked through the night, preparing the remedy. It required precise measurements and careful preparation. Too much fungus would poison the patient. Too little would not stop the infection. But with dragon and human healers working together, combining their knowledge and skills, they created something neither could have achieved alone. At dawn, they administered the first dose to Pip, the smallest and weakest of the sick. For hours, nothing happened. Then his fever began to drop. His breathing eased. Color returned to his scales. By midday, he was conscious and asking for food. The cure worked. They prepared more of the remedy and distributed it to all the sick, dragon and human alike. Within days, the sickness was defeated. Lives that had seemed lost were saved. The gathering of healers dispersed, returning to their homes with new knowledge and new respect for each other. Word spread quickly of what had been achieved through cooperation. Dragons who had scoffed at Elena's teachings began to reconsider. Humans who had feared all dragons saw that not all were monsters. At Kraventhar, Vormash recovered from his own illness. He had been one of the sick, though he had hidden it from most of the clan. As his strength returned, he thought about what had happened. The cure had come not from ancient dragon wisdom alone, but from collaboration with humans, from the very kind of cooperation that Elena had been teaching. He called another council, but this time he invited representatives from the valley community. Thresh, Lissa, and Kyrie flew to Kraventhar, unsure of their welcome. They landed in the great courtyard where they had trained as cubs a lifetime ago. Vormash greeted them formally. "You have proven your way has value," he said without preamble. "The sickness would have killed us all without the collaboration you organized." "We only did what Elena taught us," Thresh replied. "We sought wisdom wherever it could be found." "The human," Vormash said the words without contempt this time. "She has changed much in 3 years." "She has helped us change," Kyrie corrected. "But the choice to change was always ours." Vormash nodded slowly. "I have been considering a proposal. The old ways have served dragonkind for millennia, but the world changes. Perhaps we must change with it or risk becoming irrelevant." "What do you propose?" Lissa asked carefully. "An alliance," Vormash said. "Not a joining. Kraventhar will maintain its traditions, but we will recognize your community as legitimate. We will share knowledge and resources. We will no longer view your path as corruption, but as an alternative that has proven its worth." It was more than they had dared hope for. Thresh looked at his fellow dragons, seeing his own surprise reflected in their eyes. "We accept," Thresh said, "with the understanding that each community remains autonomous. We do not seek to change Kraventhar, only to coexist with it." "Agreed," Vormash said. He extended a claw, and Thresh touched it with his own, an ancient gesture of peace between dragons. As the representatives from the valley prepared to leave, Silvara approached Vormash privately. "You have made a wise choice," she said. "The cubs we raised in the valley are strong, perhaps stronger than those raised in the old way, strong enough to adapt, to cooperate, to build rather than simply dominate." "I know," Vormash admitted. "I have known for some time, but tradition is difficult to set aside, even when it no longer serves us well." "Tradition should be a foundation to build on," Silvara said, "not a cage to trap us. You taught me that long ago before I forgot it." Ormash watched as the valley dragons took flight, returning to their home. He felt old, older than his centuries, but also something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt hopeful. The alliance changed the region. Kraventhar remained traditional, training its cubs in the harsh old ways. But now there was an alternative for those who wanted it. Young dragons who questioned the old paths could visit the valley, learn from Elena, and choose which life suited them better. Some chose Kraventhar, finding purpose in the structure and strength of traditional dragon society. Others chose the valley, drawn to the cooperation and questioning that defined Elena's teachings. Many found a middle path, taking lessons from both communities. Human villages noticed the change as well. Dragons from the valley did not raid them. Instead, they traded, exchanging protection for goods and knowledge. It was a strange new world, one where humans and dragons might be something other than predator and prey. Elena continued her work, now recognized not just by the valley community, but by dragon clans across the region. She was getting older, her hair showing streaks of gray, her movements slower than they had been. But her mind remained sharp, and her heart remained committed to the vision she had shared with the cubs all those years ago. On the 5th anniversary of leaving Kraventhar, the valley held another celebration. The community had grown to nearly 100 dragons now, plus a handful of humans who had come to learn and teach. It was a true village, with permanent structures and established traditions of its own. Thresh stood before the assembled crowd, his scales gleaming bronze in the firelight. He was a leader now, respected by both traditional dragons and those who followed the new ways. "5 years ago," he began, 12 cubs made a choice that seemed insane. We abandoned the only home we had ever known. We followed a human woman who offered us something we did not even understand: love, kindness, the freedom to choose." He looked to where Elena sat, surrounded by the cubs who were cubs no longer. Pip and Kyre and Lissa, and all the others who had been there from the beginning. "Elena taught us that strength comes in many forms," Thresh continued. "The strength to fight, yes, but also the strength to question, the strength to adapt, the strength to care about others. We are stronger now, not despite embracing these things, but because of them. The crowd roared approval. Even some dragons from Kraventhar who had come to observe nodded in acknowledgement. Elena rose slowly, and the crowd fell silent. "You honor me with your words," she said, "but the truth is that you taught yourselves. I only offered a different perspective. You had the courage to embrace it, to test it, to make it your own. The community you have built is yours, not mine." "It is ours," Lisa agreed, "dragon and human together. A new way that honors the past while embracing the future." As the celebration continued, Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had come to the dragons as a frightened tribute, expecting death. Instead, she had found purpose. She had helped create something that would outlast her, a legacy of cooperation and questioning that would influence dragonkind for generations. Years passed. Elena grew old while her dragon friends remained vibrant. It was the way of things. Humans lived brief lives compared to the centuries dragons enjoyed. But the lessons she taught did not fade with her aging body. They were passed from dragon to dragon, from generation to generation. When Elena finally died, at the age of 65, the entire region mourned. Dragons from every clan attended her funeral, a ceremony that blended human and dragon traditions. They built a monument in the valley, a stone carved with her image and the words she had spoken most often. "Kindness is not weakness. It takes more strength to be gentle than to be cruel." The cubs, who had been cubs no longer, now ancient by human standards but still young for dragons, stood together at the ceremony. They remembered the frightened woman who had healed their wounds and opened their minds. They remembered her gentle hands and soft songs. They remembered how she had stood before an elder dragon, choosing to fight rather than abandon them. "She changed us," Pip said quietly. "She gave us the chance to change ourselves," Thresh corrected. "And through us, she changed the world." It was true. The Valley community continued to grow and thrive. The ideas Elena had introduced spread throughout dragon society. Not all dragons accepted them. Many clung to traditional ways, but enough embraced the new thinking that dragon culture itself began to shift. Humans and dragons, while not always allies, learned to coexist more peacefully. Villages no longer lived in constant fear of dragon attacks. Dragons no longer viewed humans as mere prey or servants. It was not a perfect peace, but it was progress. And in the valley, where Elena had taught and lived and died, new generations of dragons learned a different way. They learned to fight and hunt, yes, but also to cooperate and question. They learned that tradition should guide, but not imprison. They learned that strength takes many forms. Most importantly, they learned that sometimes the smallest creature, armed with nothing but kindness and courage, can change the world. Vormash, ancient beyond measure now, sometimes flew to the valley to watch the young dragons train. He saw them working together, combining combat practice with strategic thinking. He saw them debating philosophy and ethics, questioning everything just as Elena had taught them to do. He thought about the day the human had arrived at Kraventhar, so many years ago, how he had almost dismissed her as worthless, how close he had come to executing her for corrupting the cubs, how certain he had been that the old ways were the only ways. He had been wrong. It was difficult to admit, even to himself, but the evidence was undeniable. The Valley dragons were not weaker than traditional dragons. They were different, and in many ways that difference made them stronger. They adapted better to changing circumstances. They formed alliances instead of making enemies. They built things rather than simply taking them. "You see it now, don't you?" Silvara's voice came from beside him. She had landed silently, watching the same scene. "I see that I was afraid," Vormash admitted. "Afraid that change would destroy us. But change was coming regardless. Elena simply helped guide it in a direction that preserved the best of what we were, while discarding the worst." She would be pleased to hear you say that, Sovara said, though I think she always knew you would come to understand eventually. I wish I had understood sooner, Vormash said. Perhaps I could have learned from her as well. It is never too late, Sovara told him. The valley welcomes all who come with open minds and willing hearts. Vormash looked at her in surprise. I am too old to change my ways. Elena was human and thus aged quickly, Sovara reminded him. But she never stopped learning, never stopped growing, right up until her death. If she could do it, so can you. Vormash considered this. Then slowly he descended into the valley. Young dragons looked up in surprise as the legendary elder landed among them. They had heard stories of Vormash, the stern keeper of tradition, the dragon who had exiled their founders. I have come to learn, Vormash announced simply. A young dragon named River, daughter of Thresh, approached cautiously. What do you wish to learn? Everything, Vormash said. Teach me what Elena taught you. Show me this new way of thinking. I may be old, but I am not yet too old to question my beliefs. And so the ancient elder became a student, learning from dragons young enough to be his great-great-grandchildren. It was humbling and sometimes frustrating, but also enlightening. He discovered that questioning did not weaken his beliefs, but strengthened them by forcing him to understand why he believed what he believed. He learned that tradition could be honored without being rigid, that strength could include compassion, that the fierce independence of dragons could be balanced with the cooperation Elena had championed. When he finally returned to Kraventhar, months later, he was changed, not transformed entirely, but softened around the edges, more willing to listen, more open to new ideas. He began implementing small changes at Kraventhar, nothing dramatic, but enough that the cubs there noticed and questioned and began their own journeys of discovery. The story of Elena and the dragon cubs became legend, told wherever dragons gathered. Some versions exaggerated her courage, others downplayed the dragon's transformation, but the core truth remained. A human woman had shown young dragons a different way to live, and they had loved her enough to abandon everything they knew to follow it. And in doing so, they had proven something that would echo through dragon history for millennia to come. They had proven that change was not weakness, that questioning was not betrayal, that love could exist between species that had been enemies for countless generations. Most importantly, they had proven that the smallest, weakest creature could achieve impossible things if they had courage and compassion. It was the very essence of what humans called humanity, fuck yeah. The recognition that humans, despite their fragility and brief lives, possess something special, something that could change the world. Elena's monument stood in the valley, weathering wind and rain, a permanent reminder of what had been achieved. Dragons would come from distant lands to see it, to hear the story, to understand the lesson. And every dragon cub who visited learned the same thing, that long ago, 12 young dragons abandoned their training and ran toward a human woman they loved. And in doing so, they changed the fate of two species forever.